establishing central presence immediately, opening diagonals for development. Developing the knight to a flexible square, this move immediately challenges white's central ambition and prepares for rapid piece deployment. Securing central space, white immediately challenges black's knight and prepares to develop a robust pawn phalanx. Black opens a diagonal for the queen's bishop, preparing to develop and contest the center while maintaining a solid pawn structure. Developing the knight here secures the center and prepares for potential kingside castling, while keeping options open for pawn pushes. Pinning the knight initiates immediate tactical skirmishes, forcing white to consider pawn structure versus piece activity. Solidifying central presence while keeping options open for development, this knight subtly curbs black's queenside ambitions. Securing the king's safety allows for continued development and preparation for central pawn breaks. Pinning the knight here immediately targets the center, potentially creating imbalances and forcing black into defensive preparations. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing for potential kingside expansion offers a robust response to white's aggressive bishop. Solidifying the center and preparing development, while subtly restricting black's queenside pieces. Strategically consolidating the queen behind the pawns, preparing for future central play while reinforcing the kingside castled position. Restoring the fianchetto bishop's freedom offers better piece harmony, preparing for central pawn advances. Boldly challenging the center, this push opens crucial diagonals for black's pieces and prepares to seize initiative. Unifying the queenside and preparing a central pawn push, this squares the circle. Re-establishing a defensive presence on the e-file allows for potential queenside piece development and reinforces the pawn chain. Securing the king amidst the central tension, castling now prepares for potential pawn breaks and safer piece deployment. Striking at the core of white's pawn structure, this exchange suddenly liberates black's queenside and opens avenues. Opening the b-file grants aggressive pawn play possibilities, but weakens the queenside pawn structure considerably. Challenging the bishop's placement, this move initiates a delicate dance of piece exchanges, potentially altering the pawn structure's long-term integrity. Re-establishing the bishop's active diagonal offers white improved piece coordination against black's central pawns. Breaking the central pawn chain opens dynamic possibilities, but also exposes the d6 pawn. Refocusing the defense, the rook now stands ready to bolster the center or perhaps swing over to the kingside. Unpinning the knight and developing another piece offers flexibility, but it temporarily concedes central control. Disrupting black's pawn structure to gain a potential queenside initiative. Reclaiming the queen centrally re-establishes black's offensive potential, though it also opens lines toward the monarch. Shifting the queen centrally enhances its influence, eyeing potential weaknesses while preparing for pawn advances. Exchanging the bishop clarifies the pawn structure, creating a potential outpost for the knight on e4 while relieving pressure on black's king. Trading the bishop solidifies the central pawn structure, though it concedes the bishop pair for now. Asserting central influence, the knight boldly ventures to a more active square, eyeing potential weaknesses in white's pawn structure. Opening the d-file now grants white attacking chances on the weakened kingside pawn structure. Opening the d-file now strategically unleashes your rook, eyeing potential exchanges and asserting control over that crucial open line. Opening the central files now makes immediate sense, targeting black's doubled pawns and potentially creating attacking avenues. Asserting presence on the open file now, black aims to challenge white's central control and potentially prepare for pawn advances. Opening the d-file for assault, white aims to exploit the doubled pawns and potentially create a passed pawn. Opening the queenside flank for piece mobility, black seeks to contest the open files and activate their dormant bishop. Concentrating rook power along the open d-file now aims to dominate the center and pressure black's pawn structure. The knight ventures to the queenside, seeking a more active post and perhaps a future raid on c4. Securing the kingside pawn structure against potential knight incursions, becomes paramount for white's development. Sacrificing the exchange is a bold gambit, hoping to disrupt white's pawn structure and unlock attacking potential against the king. Reclaiming the open file solidifies control and prepares for a decisive central push. Regaining the rook on the d-file reestablishes central pressure and clears the path for the queen's active participation. Reactivating the bishop to a more active square, aiming to contest control of the central files. A quiet repositioning of the queen, seeking better protection and potentially eyeing central influence or a pawn advance on the queen side, while also respecting the bishop's current constraint. Reactivating the bishop, this maneuver aims to exploit the now exposed kingside squares and potentially pressure the queen. Re-establishing the queenside rook's presence on the open file offers central control and potential counterplay against white's pawn structure. The rook aggressively occupies the 7th rank, strangling black's position and threatening devastating inroads. A daring attempt to untangle pieces, though it invites a positional bind on the d-file. Seizing the initiative, this queen sortie creates immediate threats against black's exposed king and pawn structure. Seizing the passed pawn opens up a complex tactical battle, potentially creating weaknesses around white's king if black can coordinate effectively. Unveiling the queen simplifies the position, seeking to exploit the backward pawn and control open files. The rook's return now aims to disrupt white's reorganized pawn structure, seeking active counterplay on the open files. Developing the bishop offers better control over the central squares and prepares for potential pawn pushes. A bold knight sortie, aiming for a queenside outpost to disrupt white's pawn structure and potentially fork pieces. Reclaiming the central files after white's pawn sacrifice solidifies a crucial positional advantage. Reasserting control of the kingside rook is paramount, as black prepares to regroup and defend against white's advanced pieces. A bold pawn thrust aimed at securing central space and potentially creating passed pawns. Pioneering advancement on the queenside, this pawn pushes to gain territory and potentially disrupt white's development. Reclaiming the c4 square solidifies central control, potentially launching a queenside pawn push. Opening the queenside flank with this pawn thrust creates immediate dynamism, threatening white's central pawn structure and aiming to seize initiative. Cracking open that queenside pawn chain now frees your rook for decisive central action. Reclaiming the pawn opens crucial central files for your rook to exploit, transforming the board's dynamics. Pushing this pawn forward aggressively opens lines and challenges black's cramped position. Pushing a pawn further asserts space, aiming to create a passed pawn even in this pawn-heavy endgame. Asserting central control, this advances white's pawn structure to challenge black's isolated queenside pawns and prepare for a potential kingside push. Suddenly, black's knight jumps into the fray, challenging white's central dominance and threatening to disrupt their pawn structure. King activation is key. Bringing the monarch off the back rank prepares for the endgame's tactical skirmishes and gains crucial mobility. Unleashing pawns on the kingside, this gambit seeks to create chaos and open lines against the exposed monarch, though it risks structural weaknesses. Consolidating pawns on the kingside offers a touch of solidity, but sacrifices potential central control. Embracing the initiative, black cracks open the kingside pawn structure to expose white's monarch to potential pressure. Opening the g-file offers a critical pathway to exploit weaknesses around black's king. Centralizing the knight on e6 shores up the kingside and opens diagonals for attack. Shifting the king now aims to activate it, preparing to support the central pawns and potentially control newly opened lines. Attempting to create a passed pawn on the queenside now risks isolating your pawn and weakening your kingside structure. Initiating a pawn push to open lines for the rook and potentially trap the knight. Repositioning the knight to a more active central square, controlling key squares and aiming for eventual queenside expansion. Challenging black's pawn chain with a rook invasion and threatening to split the island of pawns. The knight's advanced post at d3 offers a potent outpost, threatening to disrupt white's pawn structure and initiate a dangerous kingside assault. Unleashing the pawn's potential, this advance threatens to crack open lines towards black's beleaguered monarch. Opening the F file now sacrifices material for potential counterplay against white's exposed monarch. Unlocking the king's defense, white opens a path for the rook's powerful centralization.